Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Marilyn. My name's Ashley. I'm a writer and an actor, and I just recently created this show called I'm Happy You're Here, which I'm just bringing up some notes so I don't go off the deep end, which is a comedy mental health show. I actually have a water bottle, which I forgot. This is so good for the presentation. Okay. I created a mental health show called I'm Happy You're Here, which is specifically geared toward adults. So that means that there are dirty jokes and swears in it. So just as a warning. But it's for like teens and adults, and I basically started it because I felt like there was a gap in the information and the resources that were being given to people in their 20s, 30s, and a little bit younger. And I was one of those people. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my story before I get back to this and force you to watch one of our episodes. But I grew up with, I didn't know any of these terms, obviously, at the time, but I will use them now. But I grew up with an anxiety disorder. I didn't realize that I had one for a while. And I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew I was scared kind of about everything. I was scared of going to bed. I was scared of the toilet. I was scared of, I was just scared. And it was something that I sort of, I grew up in the 90s. There wasn't a lot of conversation around mental health. I don't think any of my parents, neither of my parents ever had that conversation or understood it. And I didn't know how to talk about it because I was a kid. So it wasn't until I think I was about 7 or 8, and I just stopped being able to eat. Every time I went to go eat, I would feel really anxious and feel very, very nauseous. And I convinced myself that if I ate, I would throw up. And that was when my mom took notice because her child stopped eating. And I don't recommend this. Strangely, she took me to a doctor, and the doctor was like, "Stop worrying, or you'll get an ulcer." And I was like, "Okay." And then I stopped. I stopped being worried about being nauseous. That's maybe the first time that's ever happened to me in the history of ever. I really don't recommend telling people to stop worrying if they have an anxiety disorder. It usually does not work. But the anxiety disorder was really more a precursor to my main source of difficulty when I was younger, which was obsessive compulsive disorder. So I grew up again in the 90s where the only depictions of OCD on TV or in movies were that you had to wash your hands a lot or you touched a doorknob a lot. And so I had no idea that the thing that I was experiencing could be OCD or was OCD. And OCD, if you're not familiar, it stands for obsessive compulsive disorder, but it's characterized mostly by intrusive thoughts. And intrusive thoughts have become a little bit of a meme. I'm sure your Gen Zers would have loved it, which it's sort of like, oh, I let the intrusive thoughts win if I like press a button I wasn't supposed to press, or and that's not what it's like. It's intrusive thoughts are sort of characterized by being incessant and being really disturbing for the people that have them. So, for example, a common thought that probably people have had before is like you're standing at a stoplight and you're about to cross the street and there's someone at the stoplight with you, and your brain just creates the thought of like, what if I push that person into traffic? If you don't have OCD, you might be like, that was weird, and let it go and go on with your day. Someone with OCD would go, oh my God, why did I think that? Why did I want to, do I want to push that person into traffic? Does that indicate something about me? Am I bad? Am I wrong? Do I want to murder people? And then it becomes an obsession that you then ruminate over and over again on. And the compulsion part of it is that you basically are trying to self-soothe by doing something compulsive to address the obsession that you're having. So for example, the common thing where we think about like someone washing their hands a bunch of times, the obsession is hypochondria. I'm gonna get sick, I'm gonna get sick, I'm gonna get sick. And then the compulsion becomes, if I just keep washing my hands, then I won't get sick. And it's a self-soothing thing. But of course, the disorder part of it is that this is not necessarily a healthy way of engaging with one's thoughts. It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy where the more thoughts you have and the more you give into the compulsion, the worse they get. So my intrusive thoughts were all over the map, but they never were anything that manifested physically. It was all sort of internal compulsions. So man, you could just spin a wheel and I probably had the intrusive thought, but they were usually, difficult for a young girl to have. They were sometimes violent. They sometimes had to do with sex. It was just really intense, and I had no idea what was going on with me, and I had no one to talk to about it because I had a lot of shame about it, and I was afraid that if I was honest about what I was going through, that people would think I was crazy. And it wasn't until the advent of the internet, strangely, that I kind of got any relief from this condition. I know the internet has brought us all manner of ills, but it was the first time that I had a resource where I could look up what was happening to me and actually understand it. So I think we got the internet in my house. I mostly used it to look up Sailor Moon photos. That was a really good use of my time on the internet, I have to say. But then after that, I was like, what's going on with my brain? And I ended up Googling one of my intrusive thoughts, expecting the result to be like, oh, you're crazy, never talk to anyone again. And instead, the result was a forum for people with OCD. And the very first post was like the thing that I had just typed into the search engine. I should say Google. It was probably I Ask Jeeves'd or I Alta Vista'd. And so I started reading this forum, and the relief I felt was immeasurable. It makes me emotional thinking about it now because I felt so alone. I felt so alone with this thing going on with me. And I was so young. I remember being like 10 and having no concept of religion, but like praying to God. I was like, if there's anyone out there, just make these thoughts go away because they were hurting me so much. And it wasn't until I found that forum that I was like, oh, there's a name for this. The relief that flooded my system when I had a name for it, for my condition, was so intense. And it still was a long time before I started getting help, but that was the first step, was understanding what was going on with me, knowing that there was a context and a paradigm for why I was the way that I was and why I was having the thoughts that I was having, was so helpful for me. I didn't end up getting help with OCD or my other mental health issues until I was in my 20s. Because I went through a little bit of just a baby trauma. I had a partner who was addicted to opioids and passed away. And I knew that I needed help dealing with the grief because losing anyone is very difficult. Losing him under the circumstances that I lost him was very difficult because we were struggling with him having an active addiction. And we had seen some therapists together in Seattle, which is where we were living. And I discovered in retrospect they were really not very good, there's an I'm Happy You're Here series that we're releasing right now called I'm Scared of Therapy. And one of the episodes is how to know if your therapist sucks or not. And it's because I've had therapists that have sucked and I didn't know. So I'm passing the savings on to all of you. He talked about himself for most of the session, and then he would say like one insightful thing, and I'd be like, a therapist. And then otherwise it was not useful. But he actually, I didn't know what to do. His name was David, after David died. And so I actually emailed that bad therapist and was like, do you have any recommendations? Which is wild in retrospect, but he actually ended up recommending to me a really great therapist that I saw when I moved back down here. And that therapist's name was Chris, and I went to go see him about my grief, and then I discovered so much more about my life, my mental health journey that had nothing to do with David. The way that I was raised, I learned about attachment theory, I learned how anxiety disorders can come from your attachments with your parents, or lack thereof, as the case may be. And I finally started getting help for my OCD. And he was a somatic therapist, and also he used all sorts of different modalities. And so when I first started talking to him about my OCD, he told me about mindfulness meditation, which I'd never meditated before. And I was also surprised that a therapist was telling me about meditation. But he taught me the process, which is a very simple framework and very difficult to do. But you basically just sit and you look a little bit ahead of you, and every time you have a thought, you label it as thinking. So you literally think in your head, thinking, and then you focus on your exhale. That's it. And it's, again, it's super simple instructions, but if you've ever tried to sit down and meditate, it's so hard. And, but the purpose of it was to make me feel like all of my thoughts were neutral. So if I had a thought like, I need to go to the grocery store, I label it as thinking and I let it go. That was the other thing. You label it as thinking and you sort of imagine it floating away like a cloud in the sky or something. And then if I had a really shame-inducing, intrusive thought, thinking and let it go. To remove the charge from the intrusive thought, because whenever I had an emotional response to an intrusive thought, it would solidify it. And it was like, my brain was like, ooh, she likes that, even though I didn't. It was like, ooh, she responded. Let's send that again. Let's send that again. So the more that I could treat those thoughts neutrally, let them come in, label them as thinking, not judge them. That was a huge thing, because a lot of it was like shame from judgment of the fact that I was having the thought at all. So when I could label it as thinking and let it go without judging it, it reduced the charge on my intrusive thoughts so tremendously that I still have them, but I know now how to deal with them. I've trained my brain enough to just let them go. That the amount of pain that I felt as a 10-year-old, she would never be able to imagine that I could have the relief that I have now from that condition. Just from the fact of, being honest with a professional and then getting a tool that I needed. And so that really leads me to the show I made, which is I really believe in mental health transparency. That's why I'm very grateful to NAMI and all the people that do all this amazing work for NAMI, because as we all know, so much of the problem of the suffering of mental health, a lot of it is shame. A lot of it is not knowing how to talk about it, not having it discussed openly, fearing judgment around it, and then that being a block to getting the help that you need. And so a big part of I'm Happy You're Here, and honestly the reason that it is can be kind of crass, is because I want to remove not only the stigma, but the sting of talking about it. Like, it doesn't have to be, even though we can go through heavy things and the experience of having mental health issues can be very intense, talking about it doesn't need to be heavy. We can take away the sort of the bite of it and make it more accessible. The series that we're releasing right now, I'm Scared of Therapy, is like a bunch of small episodes, one of which I'll show you now. But the first episode that we released is all about anxiety. It's like a 25-minute video, so it's basically like an episode of TV. And I just break down anxiety disorders, where they come from, what's happening in your brain, and then what you can do about them. And I've had a lot of people, which I'm so grateful for, tell me like, oh, I understand my wife now, or oh my God, I never knew that this part, it just, explaining it, I think, in a way that isn't condescending, is funny, is light, seems to be resonating with people. And so that's part of the reason I wanted to come here, is to share it. And if you have younger people in your life, or millennials like me, that don't mind a curse word or two, and are struggling, I think it could be a really great resource for people. So I'm just gonna